As she said, my name is Chelsea Peddecord, and I am a proud, die-hard youth pastor. We heard a lot about a certain type of nerds this week. Thank you for that, Nathan. I am a youth ministry nerd, okay? I can be seen scrolling on websites called Download Youth Ministry. You can find me scrolling TikTok. For those of you who learn the term exvangelical, there's an entire exvangelical side to TikTok. It's fascinating, also heartbreaking, but I love youth ministry and learning more about teenagers and how we can pastor and develop them for not just the next generation in the future, but to be the church today. And when I started figuring out my calling, trying to understand who I am, who it is God has created me to be, what do I do in this world, where do I fit, I decided to change my major in college. I wanted to change it to something that I thought would make my family members really proud, that would make me tons of money and gain me lots of respect. So I became a sociology major. Do we have a sociology person? Oh, that's common. Oh, we got one. Yeah, you know the looks you get. You know the looks you get. At least when you're a psychology major, people are like, oh, like a therapist. With sociology, you just got blank stares. Now, lo and behold, I use my major every single day, okay? Yeah. God knew what God was up to, I suppose. Who would have thought? But one of the studies in sociology that really stuck with me, that I still ponder, think about today, was some of the work of Emil Durkheim, who's often seen as one of the fathers of sociology. And it was a famous study of the sacred and the profane. Now, everyone in this room, you're going to hate this study, but you're going to stick with me, okay? Emil Durkheim believed the world was in two separate entities: the sacred, the churches, the worship, the pews, communion, and the profane, everything else. And that people didn't really want these worlds to intersect. It's a very black and white way of thinking of here's who you are at church when you are in the sacred, and here's who you are in the profane, and they just do not mix well. You are in one or the other. And I think this black and white thinking actually really pervaded our world. This us versus them. You see it in Christian fundamentalism. You see it in the deep separation in a lot of these deeply conservative denominations of, we're being persecuted for our faith, for our Christianity. And then you mention you live in America, you have freedom, and it goes in one ear out the other, right? It's us versus them. It's this black and white thinking. We are the sacred. The world is the profane, until we go back on home to be with Jesus. That's the type of church I grew up in, and I still see it all over TikTok. I still see it, the long Facebook posts as someone has decided to leave the church and is in the midst of deconstruction. I see it when I sit on a plane and someone asks me what I do for a living, and I'm about to lie because I don't want them to hate me or apologize for cursing. Yeah, when I go out on dates, I say I'm a teacher. It's not a complete lie. People are still really bought into the separation of the sacred and the profane. But you're here today because you're a good Methodist, or some now Episcopalian, some maybe UCC, but you're mainline. And you're sitting here screaming in your mind, thinking, no, there's gray. It's not black and white. The sacred can be found in anything. Grace is moving and grace is active. And I'm with you. I know that. You know that. But Gen Z isn't hearing that. You see, Gen Z is seeing the sacred and profane. And older generations, when they didn't know what to do, they would run to the sacred. You wanted to be seen at church. You wanted people to know where you went to church. We talked about maybe these feelings of irrelevancy older generations may have. And it's because the sacred was where you wanted to be, how you wanted people to know you, and there was some fear there. But Gen Z feels that fear about the sacred. And they're running towards the profane because they see this black and white, and they are so deeply confused because they know the world is gray. I would argue Gen Z, without knowing it, are all Wesleyans, really. But that's the problem. They don't know it. And I don't know about you, but I look at our churches, I look at the good work that I've heard about this week alone, and I know it's good and I know it's holy, but there's still this fear of, where are we going to be 20 years from now? Do I have a job 30 years from now? Let me tell you, as a diehard youth pastor, sometimes youth ministry is the first thing they cut. And we have less people scared of the sacred forcing their kids to go to church. Where are we heading with this new generation who is quite honestly the first generation to be growing up in an America that is not predominantly religious? You see, right now, many of the loudest voices in Christianity are the voices that only see sacred and profane, that only see us versus them, that are focused on warning teenagers about don't hang out with the bad kids, you're gonna stumble. Don't have sex, you'll get pregnant and die. That's for Mean Girls. It was funny then, but now it's traumatic. That is what they're hearing. And Gen Z sees gray. And you and I know our theology, our theological task, what we believe about the world and means of grace and how the Spirit is at work around us can answer these deep questions. When they're out protesting, as Gen Z is incredible about doing, and they're asking, where's the church? You know we can say, no, our denomination, we have a long history of caring about justice. And I think everyone in here would be honest, like, here's where we've messed up along the way, but we'll own that. Let's march together. That when Gen Z is asking about things that a lot of adults roll their eyes about, like, oh, the Travis Scott concert, like, is that in God's plan? Like, that's what they're asking. And it's so easy to even, as more progressive pastors, remove ourselves from culture that we see as materialistic, but that is what they're wrestling with. We know the answers to that. We know how to wrestle with the theology for that. And better yet, you look at all those seminaries in the hall, all those seminaries will tell each and everyone in here, it's okay to say, I don't know. But we need to make space for their questions. And we need to make space if we don't like their answers. I was just chatting with Kate, and I was telling her I put a poll up on my youth ministry social media, and it asked silly questions of, do you think, God planned what you had for breakfast this morning? All the way, do you think God is planning where you're going to go to college or where you'll go after high school? And I did not like all of their responses. But it's my job and my calling to make space for them. Look, I am young enough to believe that I know how to tell all of you how to fix all your churches. But I am old enough to at the same time know that a lot of what I'm saying you're already doing, okay? I would guess y'all are preaching the gospel. I would guess you are out serving, that you are out caring for people and fighting for people. But what I want to know is, are you having the deep theological conversations with your young people? Better yet, when was the last time you talked to a young person? Not as a spiritual authority, but as a spiritual companion. Gen Z isn't looking for more authority. They're vastly skeptical of authority and institutions. but they can make space for a spiritual companion who will sit there when they ask, did God really want my parents to get divorced? When they sit there and ask, is that part of God's plan that I didn't make the team? Because that was my entire identity. And somehow as we kept aging and going through our ministries, we stopped maybe answering those questions and focusing on other parts of our ministry. And I get that what you're doing is good and holy work. But Gen Z needs you to notice them. Gen Z needs you to be the person who shows up and tells them, yeah, that's totally fine that you don't believe in any of this. I struggle with it too sometimes. And now, let me give you some context, because I can't sit here and tell you I'm always perfect at this, but here's some things that I've learned, and these are more inside the church examples. So, like we heard, I am in Dallas. I am in the Bible Belt. My congregation is very, very white and very, very affluent. And so what this looks like for me, talking theology with teenagers, do we have any sports fans in the room? No one in my coaching group was a sports fan. Okay, this makes me feel a little bit better. If you ever turn on ESPN, you might hear a show called ESPN 30 for 30. Yes, thank you. And it has the big Morgan Freeman-like voice of, what if I told you? Okay. So what we did, because all of my students are sports fans, is we did a series of, what if I told you Jesus didn't die for your sins? What? We've had moments like that. We've had moments with students where you get the classic, how many of us have felt this? Chelsea, my best friend's an atheist, and they're way nicer than the Christians I know. And instead of saying, yeah, I get that, you know what I say instead? Be like, of course they are. God can work through anyone. That's God's grace. That's being made in the image of God and allowing them to process this theological conversation that matters, that sets a foundation of faith. These theological conversations, they pop up in times of tragedy. The summer of 2018, we had a student who drowned. He had just graduated high school. And as the students were mourning and sobbing, do you know what they all said to each other? God's got a plan. And of course they said that, because quickly in a moment, it's comforting, you know. But then what we did a few weeks later, when the immediate trauma has hit, we all know, right? You're in ministry. These things, they don't just clear up. But at least after the immediacy, we sat and talked about what is God's plan, and didn't miss this opportunity with our students. And look, that's my context. You know, there are other areas of Dallas. One of my friends, this was the best thing I think I've ever seen, maybe in my life, works in the most progressive area of Dallas. It's a road called Cedar Springs. It's actually called the Gayborhood. And so I'm just scrolling one day through Instagram, and I see, you know, sermon series branding, and I see the beautiful arc, you know, the children's imagery, the rainbow, the cute little lion and the zebra. You kind of wonder how that works, but. And the title of the sermon series is The One Where God Got Mad and Drowned Everyone. In that community, that is captivating. That's what they want to wrestle with. When you have been hurt and felt like no one saw you in the church, and you read these stories of this angry, mean God, it was brilliant. Another one of my friends, the Reverend Macy Liptoy, also works in a very unchurched area of Dallas. And so she decided, you know what, we're going to do a Bible study, and we're calling it Bible BS, Bible bullshit. And we're going to go through those passages that have hurt us, that are difficult, that are painful. We're not going to hide from them. And people showed up. And these are all inside the church examples. But what about outside the church? You don't have to preface a theological conversation with, hey, would you like to have a theological conversation? No one likes that. I know some of you did that in seminary. No one liked it then either. But there are always instances to have this, because theology should come up naturally, because we know God is everywhere, not tied to the sacred and the profane. This past weekend, I was at the aquarium with my sister, and I'm looking at these fish, and I have awe. And I turned to her, and I was like, experience, life, what I know about Scripture, Bible, seminary, blah, 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 aside, like, these are the things that make me believe in Creator. And then we started talking about Genesis 1 and 2. Which one are you going to choose? Metaphor, real, evolution? I didn't sit there and say, hey, I've really been thinking, and I want to know about your theological views on creation. It came up naturally and was not tied to sacred or profane. It was in the gray. Because we know in the gray, there is always grace. So I have a few questions for you, especially since we're doing these like talk back times eventually. The first, if you're a notes person, I want you to write them down. I'm feeling very youth pastor teacher and that I can make you do that. The first, when did you last teach theology? Was it a formal space like a confirmation? Was it casually over coffee with a friend? It just got brought up? How did that make you feel? When was the last time you taught theology? The second thing I want to ask, you heard some ideas I had with series, some things I've seen friends do, and I know every context is different, is when did you last creatively communicate your theology? When did you last creatively communicate it? And the third thing is, when did you last do this? Have these conversations with a young person. And if you don't know where to find them, ask your local youth pastor, because there might not be a bigger blessing to us than someone wanting to volunteer with our students. I am here today because a youth pastor took the time to care for me and get to know me. Look, here's what I've learned as I've become a Methodist, 7 years ago. As Emil Durkheim was wrong, it's not sacred and profane. In fact, I would say it's what Celtic Christianity calls the thin space. Some of you are familiar with this, I'm sure. The space where humanity and divinity intersect. It is holy. It is sacred. And it's why theology with this much grace can never be boring. It's for the 4-year-old, it's for the 14-year-old, and it's for the 84-year-old. And we will always be wrestling with it. And it is good and allows us to live into our Imago Dei. Thank you so much.